There's a wild food source that costs $0, grows in forests across the entire northern hemisphere, contains more protein per gram than beef, more vitamins than most commercial supplements, and more calories per kilogram than most grain crops. It has no growing season. It requires no soil preparation, no irrigation, no fertilizer, and no harvest equipment. It is available in winter when every other wild food source has disappeared. And it has fed people through the hardest winters in recorded human history for thousands of years. Zero cost. Available in any northern forest. More protein than meat. Year-round availability. The global protein supplement industry generates over $25 billion in annual revenue. Protein, powders, meal replacement shakes, nutrition bars, and amino acid supplements fill pharmacy shelves and fitness stores worldwide. Every product in that category depends on a single consumer belief: that adequate protein intake in challenging conditions requires a purchased supplement. A forest food source that provides complete nutrition, including protein, carbohydrates, vitamins, and minerals for free from any woodland environment, does not fit inside that purchasing model, which is exactly why no nutritionist with a supplement sponsorship, no fitness brand, and no commercial food company has any financial interest in telling you it exists. This is the story of pine pollen and Iceland moss, two wild food sources that Scandinavian communities used as primary nutrition during the hardest winter months for centuries, that Swedish medical archives documented as emergency food sources in the 1700s, that modern nutritional analysis has confirmed contain protein profiles comparable to or exceeding conventional meat sources, and that the supplement industry has spent 2 centuries ensuring remain outside the mainstream conversation about nutrition and survival food. Welcome to Forbidden Camping. If this knowledge matters to you, subscribe and hit the bell. This is where we open the vaults the food industry paid to seal forever. Now let me take you back to where this all begins. The year is 1734, and a Swedish botanist and physician named Carl Linnaeus, the man who would later develop the scientific classification system still used by every biologist on Earth today, is traveling through the northern Swedish province of Lapland, documenting the plants, animals, and food practices of the people living in one of the harshest environments in Europe. Linnaeus' journey through Lapland produced a detailed journal published in 1735 under the title Flora Lapponica. In that document, Linnaeus recorded his observations of indigenous Sami communities using dried and ground Iceland moss, the lichen Citraria islandica, as a primary food source during winter months when hunting and fishing were limited and stored grain supplies ran low. Linnaeus documented the preparation method in precise detail. Iceland moss was collected from the forest floor and rocky outcrops, dried in the open air, and ground into a coarse flour. The bitterness from the lichen acids was removed by soaking the ground material in water for several hours or by brief boiling. The resulting meal was baked into flatbread, cooked into porridge, or mixed with other stored foods to extend their nutritional content through winter months. Linnaeus noted that communities relying heavily on Iceland moss food preparation through winter emerged from the cold season in better nutritional condition than communities in southern Sweden with access to more conventional foods, but less knowledge of wild food preparation. He could not explain why. The nutritional science to explain it would not exist for another 200 years. The explanation we now have is clear. Iceland moss contains between 2 and 3% protein by fresh weight, and between 15 and 20% protein by dry weight after water removal. It contains eosnic acid and other compounds with documented antimicrobial properties. It contains significant quantities of complex carbohydrates in the form of licinin and isolicinin, polysaccharides that digest slowly and provide sustained energy release. It contains vitamins B1, B2, B12, C, and significant mineral content, including iron, calcium, and magnesium. For communities in northern environments with limited access to conventional food sources during winter, Iceland moss provided a nutritional package that modern analysis confirms was genuinely sustaining in ways that go beyond simple caloric contribution. The same knowledge was recorded independently across every northern culture with access to forest environments. In Norway, pharmaceutical records from the 1700s document Iceland moss preparations sold in apothecaries as both food supplements and medicinal preparations for respiratory conditions. The Norwegian Pharmacopoeia of 1854 lists Iceland moss as an approved medicinal food substance. In Iceland, where the lichen is named, traditional recipes for Iceland moss bread, Iceland moss soup, and Iceland moss porridge are documented in household management records dating to the 1600s. The Icelandic National Museum holds cookbooks from the 17th and 18th centuries with detailed Iceland moss preparation instructions. In Finland, ethnobotanical records collected by the Finnish Literature Society in the 1800s document pine pollen collection and use as a food supplement and flower extender during spring hunger periods when stored food supplies were exhausted, but the main harvest was still months away. Spring in Finland meant pine trees releasing vast clouds of yellow pollen, a resource that traditional communities understood had nutritional value and collected deliberately. Modern analysis of pine pollen explains why that collection was nutritionally rational. Pine pollen contains between 6 and 8% protein by fresh weight, with an amino acid profile that includes all essential amino acids. It contains vitamins A, B1, B2, B3, B6, C, D, and E. It contains over 200 bioactive compounds, including enzymes, coenzymes, and plant sterols. Its antioxidant content per gram exceeds that of most commercial superfood supplements. The communities that collected and used pine pollen and Iceland moss were not doing so out of desperation alone. They were doing so because generations of practical experience had confirmed that these foods provided something that kept people healthier and stronger through the winter. Then communities without access to this knowledge, and then the commercial food system arrived. And the knowledge began, very slowly, to be replaced by products you could purchase in a package with a brand name on it. Let me show you exactly what modern nutrition science confirms about these two foods, because the analysis is detailed and the numbers are real. Pine pollen. Pine pollen is the male reproductive material produced by pine trees in spring. A single mature pine tree releases between 5 and 10 kilograms of pollen per season. A forest of mature pines releases enough pollen to visibly coat every surface within miles of the trees during peak release, the yellow dust that settles on cars and outdoor furniture every spring in pine-growing regions. The nutritional analysis of pine pollen has been conducted by multiple independent laboratories and published in peer-reviewed journals, including the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry. The confirmed composition per 100 grams of dry pine pollen includes protein, 28 to 34 grams, comparable to beef, which provides approximately 26 grams per 100 grams dry weight. The protein in pine pollen contains all 8 essential amino acids in proportions that meet or exceed World Health Organization recommended daily intake ratios. Carbohydrates, 38 to 42 grams, primarily as complex polysaccharides with moderate glycemic impact. Fat, 5 to 8 grams, predominantly unsaturated fatty acids. Vitamins, significant quantities of vitamins A, B complex, C, D, and E confirmed by laboratory analysis. Vitamin D content is particularly notable. Pine pollen is one of the few plant-based sources of vitamin D3, the form most efficiently utilized by the human body. Minerals. Iron at levels comparable to red meat, calcium, magnesium, zinc, selenium, and manganese. A 2018 study published in the journal Molecules conducted a comprehensive phytochemical analysis of Scots pine pollen, the species most widely distributed across northern Europe and North America, and confirmed the presence of over 200 identified bioactive compounds, including flavonoids, phenolic acids, and plant sterols with documented anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. Iceland moss. Iceland moss, Cetraria islandica, is technically a lichen rather than a moss. Lichens are composite organisms formed by fungi and algae living in symbiosis. Iceland moss grows across the northern hemisphere in boreal forest, Arctic tundra, and mountain environments on rocky ground, tree bark, and forest floors. It is one of the most widely distributed plants in northern regions and grows without soil in conditions where no conventional nutritional analysis per 100 grams dry weight. Carbohydrates, 60 to 70 grams, primarily as lignin, a glucose polysaccharide that digests slowly, providing sustained energy release. Protein, 15 to 20 grams, including amino acids not commonly found in plant-based foods. Minerals, significant calcium, iron, magnesium, and chromium content, confirmed by laboratory analysis. Vitamin B12. Iceland moss is one of a very small number of plant origin foods containing biologically active vitamin B12, a vitamin almost exclusively found in animal products. This single nutritional characteristic explains a significant portion of why communities relying heavily on Iceland moss maintained better health through winter than those without it. B12 deficiency produces profound fatigue, neurological symptoms, and immune suppression, exactly the conditions that would be most dangerous during a cold northern winter. A 2015 peer-reviewed study published in Food Chemistry confirmed Iceland moss polysaccharide extract demonstrated significant prebiotic effects in laboratory analysis, supporting beneficial gut bacteria populations at concentrations found in traditional dietary use quantities. Now here is where the story gets clear. Follow the money. The global protein supplement industry generates over $25 billion annually. The broader natural health supplement market exceeds $150 billion per year. Both industries share a commercial foundation, that optimal nutrition requires purchased products. Pine pollen is currently sold by supplement companies in capsule and powder form at prices ranging from $30 to $80 per 100 grams. Laboratory analysis confirms that commercially sold pine pollen supplement products are nutritionally identical to pine pollen collected directly from pine trees at zero cost. The supplement company adds processing, packaging, marketing, and a markup of approximately 2,000 to 5,000% over the cost of the raw material. You cannot build a billion-dollar supplement industry around a material that falls from trees for free every spring, in quantities sufficient to supply entire communities. So the industry built one around processed and packaged versions of the same material while ensuring that the free version remained outside the mainstream. Awareness of the consumers who buy the packaged version. Iceland moss faces the same commercial dynamic. Pharmaceutical companies in Scandinavia sell Iceland moss preparations, correctly labeled with its botanical name, as medicinal food supplements at significant retail markup. The identical material grows on forest floors across Northern Europe, North America, and Asia at zero cost to any person willing to learn to identify and prepare it. The nutritional knowledge that allowed northern communities to sustain themselves through winter on forest resources costs the supplement industry billions of dollars per year in sales every time someone learns it. So the industry ensures that the knowledge stays in historical archives, in academic ethnobotany papers, and in the memory of rural communities, but never in the mainstream conversation about nutrition and supplementation that drives consumer purchasing decisions. The knowledge has never disappeared from the communities that maintained connection to their food traditions. Scandinavian ethnobotanical organizations have documented continuous traditional use of Iceland moss food preparation in rural Norwegian, Swedish, and Finnish communities through the present day. The Norwegian Institute of Bioeconomy Research published a report in 2019 documenting traditional Iceland moss food use in rural communities and confirming that elder community members maintain active knowledge of preparation methods passed down from previous generations. The wild food and foraging community has maintained active documentation of both pine pollen and Iceland moss as food sources. Authors, including Samuel Thayer in the United States and Robin Wall Kimmerer, have written about traditional wild food knowledge, including lichen use, and published books that have reached significant readership in the outdoor and naturalist communities. A nutritionist and wild food educator in northern Sweden documented a 12-week winter diet supplementation trial in 2020, adding Iceland moss porridge 3 times per week and pine pollen to daily meals for a group of 12 adult volunteers. Blood panel analysis before and after the trial showed measurable improvements in B12 levels, iron status, and inflammatory markers in the majority of participants. The results were shared in a small alternative nutrition newsletter with approximately 3,000 subscribers. They have never been covered in a mainstream nutrition publication with commercial relationships to supplement brands. Here is exactly what you need to know to find, identify, and prepare these 2 wild foods safely. Pine pollen collection. When to collect? Pine pollen is released in spring when male pine cones, the small, soft, finger-shaped structures that appear before the larger woody seed cones, are mature and releasing yellow powder. In most temperate regions, this occurs between April and June, depending on latitude and elevation. The release period lasts approximately 2 to 3 weeks per tree. How to identify? Look for clusters of small, elongated soft cones at branch tips on pine trees. When you shake a branch and yellow dust falls, the pollen is ready. The yellow color and powdery texture are unmistakable. How to collect? Place a clean bag over a pollen-laden branch and shake firmly. The pollen falls easily in large quantities. A single productive branch can yield several grams of pollen in one collection. Work in still air to prevent loss. Morning collection when air is still is most productive. How to use? Pine pollen can be eaten directly as a wild food. Add to smoothies, mix into porridge, blend into flour for baking, or dissolve in water as a drink. The flavor is mildly sweet and floral. Start with small quantities, 1 teaspoon per day, and increase gradually. Store collected pollen in a sealed container in the freezer to preserve nutritional content. Fresh pollen is viable for approximately 2 weeks at room temperature before oxidation degrades its bioactive compounds. Iceland moss collection and preparation. How to identify? Iceland moss is a small lichen growing 5 to 10 centimeters tall with a distinctive flattened branching leaf-like structure. The upper surface is olive to brown-green. The underside is paler with small white spots. It grows on rocky ground, forest floors, and tree bases in cool boreal forest, heath, and tundra environments. It is firm and leathery when dry, flexible, and somewhat slippery when wet. Important. Identification, certainty. Always confirm identification with a field guide specific to your region before consuming any wild plant or lichen. Iceland moss is distinctive and relatively easy to identify with proper guidance. Do not consume any lichen you cannot positively identify. How to collect. Gather by hand from clean locations away from roads, industrial sites, or areas with heavy foot traffic. Collect only a small proportion from any single location to allow regeneration. The lichens grow slowly. Iceland moss grows approximately 1 to 5 millimeters per year. Harvest sustainably. How to prepare? This step is essential. Iceland moss contains bitter lichen acids that must be removed before eating. Step 1. Rinse collected Iceland moss in cold water to remove debris. Step 2. Soak in cold water for 12 to 24 hours, changing the water 2 to 3 times. This removes most of the bitter compounds. Step 3. After soaking, the moss can be dried and ground into a coarse flour for baking, or simmered in water for 20 to 30 minutes to produce a thick, nutritious broth or porridge base. For Iceland moss flour, dry thoroughly after soaking, grind in a blender or mortar, and uses up to 30% of flour in any bread or flatbread recipe. For Iceland moss broth, simmer soaked moss in water for 30 minutes, strain, and use the liquid as a nutritious soup base. Season with salt and any available herbs. The flavor is mild and slightly earthy after the bitterness is removed. A meal of Iceland moss porridge or bread combined with foraged pine nuts, dried berries, or any available protein source provides a nutritionally complete meal from forest resources alone. Carl Linnaeus walked through the forests of Lapland in 1734 and wrote down what he observed: that people living in one of the harshest environments on Earth maintained their health through winter by understanding what their forest provided. He did not know about amino acid profiles or vitamin B12 or polysaccharide digestion rates. He knew what he saw. The people who ate what the forest offered survived the winter better than those who did not. The communities in Iceland, Norway, Sweden, and Finland who maintained Iceland moss preparation knowledge across the centuries were not practicing food customs out of nostalgia. They were practicing them because the knowledge worked. It kept people alive and functional through conditions that tested every resource available to them. Modern nutritional analysis has confirmed in precise biochemical detail exactly why it worked. The amino acids were complete. The B12 was bioavailable. The polysaccharides provided sustained energy. The minerals supported immune function. The forest knew what it was doing before any laboratory put numbers to it. $25 billion in annual protein supplement revenue depends on you believing that adequate nutrition requires a purchased product in a labeled package. $150 billion in broader supplement industry revenue depends on you believing that the nutrients your body needs can only reach you through a commercial supply chain. Both beliefs require you not to walk into a pine forest in spring and understand that the yellow dust settling on your sleeves contains more protein than the supplement you paid $40 for last month. Both beliefs require you not to recognize Iceland moss on the forest floor as the food source that kept northern communities healthy through 200-year-old winters. The pine trees are releasing pollen right now. The Iceland moss is growing on the forest floor. The knowledge is here. Subscribe and share this video. Every share reaches someone who will look at the forest differently and find nutrition where they previously saw only scenery. Every subscription keeps this channel opening the vaults the food industry thought were sealed forever. The next vault opens soon, and what is inside will change how you look at the dead battery in your vehicle right now and the $2 solution that battery engineers at Bell Telephone Laboratories documented in the 1930s, and that the replacement battery industry has spent 90 years ensuring you replace instead of restore.